So 2025 is now over, and yet the horrors persist. And by horrors, I of course mean the stack of books still on the floor of my library after 2 years of Shelve It or Scrap It, the vlog project where I try and get these stacks of books onto my shelves or scrapped into my unhaul pile. The good news is that I've actually made progress this year, and so we only have 42 books left in the stacks, which is 29 books less than at the start of 2025. But I've now decided that this stack is our final boss of Shelve It or Scrap It, and to beat it by the end of the year, each month I'm going to divide the amount of books in stacks by the amount of months left of the year to determine how many books I'm going to have to remove from the stacks per episode, so that hopefully by the end of 2026, every book in the stacks will either find a home on my shelves or be headed into my scrap pile. In episode 25, we shelved 4 books and scrapped 2, so we will be starting episode 26 with 29 books in the stacks. Hello my guys, welcome to episode 26 of Shelve It or Scrap It, the vlog series on my channel where I try and get these stacks of books behind me off the floor of my library and onto my shelves through any means possible, but typically through a process of reading them and deciding whether I would like to shelve them or whether I would like to scrap them. Now, if you are new here, I will link the full playlist in my description box in case you guys would like to get caught up, but for those of you who are regulars, welcome back. How you doing today? So in the last episode, we brought back the random number generator, and honestly, I had a blast. I've missed the spontaneity of Shelve It or Scrap It, and I don't have any other pressing matters to attend to right now, so I figured we might as well just carry on randomly generating the books that I'm going to be reading for this challenge. Now, as per the rules of 2026, to decide the amount of books that I have to remove from the stacks in this episode, we have to divide the number of books behind me by the amount of months that we have left in the year. And guys, I added a book in between episodes. We ended episode 25 on 28 books. We now have 29 in the stacks, and we currently have 7 months left of the year, including the month that I'm in right now filming this clip. So the amount of books that we have in the stacks currently does not divide equally between the amount of months that we have left in the year. If I were to get you a precise decimal amount of how many books I would have to read in this video, it would be 4.1. But obviously I can't do that. I can't read 0.1 of a book, although, you know, I've done it before and I've DNF'd that far into a book. But what that does actually mean is that for this episode, I'm going to have to remove 5 books from the stacks, which, you know, we've definitely been in a worse place before with this series, and I've definitely had to read more than 5 books. So while it's not the best, it could definitely be worse. So last episode, I let you guys know a selection of books that I really wanted to come up during our random number process, and it actually worked out really well for me. 2 of the 4 books that were picked last month were amongst the ones that I really wanted to read. So some of the ones that are top of my TBR right now, we still have the sequels. They are still great contenders. If we could get another sequel in this episode, I would be thrilled. But aside from that, you know, I would love to read First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. I really want to know what the hype is about with this one. I do also have a graphic novel in here that I think would be a super quick read, which would be nice. I have a thriller down here that's also a super quick read. And aside from that, I don't feel like I have a preference. I have Verity Guild, The Mistral, and Dawn of the Firebird in here actually. All of those I have more than one copy of, so it would be cool to read those so I can decide like which copy I want to keep, whether I care enough to keep a copy at all, and you know, all that sort of thing. But now that all of the housekeeping is done, I already have my number generator locked, loaded, and ready to go. So let's see what our first book is going to be. That did not help. That is 27. And so if we have 29 in the stacks and we start from the bottom, 29, 28, 27. She's a sequel. Oh no. Not only is she a sequel, but book number 27 is also the final book in a trilogy, and it is 3 Shattered Souls by Mike Holland. This one is the final book in the 5 Broken Blades trilogy, which is a multi-perspective fantasy heist that didn't receive a lot of great reviews. I remember I went into the first book in this series with really low expectations because of that. But I think because I went in with such low expectations, I just let this story carry me away. And I actually had a really good time with it. So this is following 6 characters, but 5 of them are the Broken Blades. So they are people who don't have a lot going on in their lives anymore. They're all in a kind of desperate place. So when they are offered the job of a lifetime, they all accept, even though it is essentially a suicide mission, because all of the characters in this book are on their way to assassinate the Emperor. So this is multi-perspective. We are following each of the characters. We have the 5 Broken Blades, and then we have one character who is escorting one of the Broken Blades to the place that they need to be. It does play out in a slightly predictable way in that when we meet all of these characters at the beginning of book 1, they're all in pairs, and then there are 3 different romances between these 6 characters, all within the pairs that they're kind of originally teamed up with at the beginning, which I think is a big reason why a lot of people didn't really get on with this one. But I just had a really good time with it, if I'm being honest. It has some pretty good plot twists, and the audio for this as well is a full cast narration, which definitely helps with immersion for me because I am a sucker for a full cast audio. I'm picky about audiobooks, but I am always going to sign up to a full cast audio. So that will probably be the way that I ingest this one. I've been doing a lot of immersion reading recently though, and I don't have a lot of projects because we're still renovating the spare bedroom. So any time that I would normally spend working on something like a jigsaw puzzle, I'm doing like renovation bits instead. And if I'm doing them alone, I listen to an audiobook, but if I'm doing something with Curtis, which we tend to kind of both be in there at the same time, then I don't. So I haven't listened to a lot of audiobooks this year at all actually, but I have been immersion reading. So I think that is the route that I'm going to go with this one. I may need to read a recap of the first 2 books if I can find one though, because this is a very fast-paced series and I think it would be good for me to refresh myself a little bit and get back on track before I start this one. But I'm very excited to be reading this right now because it's coming up to the time of year I'm going to film all of my mid-year content along with the catch-up of where I'm at with all of the series I've been reading from this year, the ones I'm up to date on, finished with, continuing on with, etc. So it's a really great time for me to get this in so I can track it as a completed series before the halfway point of the year. I have some slightly unfortunate news, besties, because at 134 pages into this one, I am still struggling to get into it. Now, when I hauled this and when I read books 1 and 2, I'm pretty sure that I talked about how I think that the best practice with this series is to read the books as close together as possible because they pretty much run into each other. You do have a recap at the beginning of the book. You have a list of characters, which is great. And then you also have literally in this book 1 singular page that updates you on where we currently are on the plot. But obviously this is 3 paragraphs that summarizes 2 books. So while it gives you the key points, it doesn't really refresh you on any of the intricacies of the story. And it's a character-driven book, but with a really fast-paced plot. So the first 2 books, I'm pretty sure I listened to the audiobooks. I did read along a little bit, but I predominantly listened to the audiobooks while I was doing something like a jigsaw. And I think story-wise, that is a really good way to ingest this one. Sometimes I can be funny about fantasy audiobooks because I'm struggling to take in the information. The only thing that I struggle with in this series in particular is remembering the names of each of the characters because we have 6 perspectives in here. You're kind of thrown in right at the beginning, running through all of them and reading from all of their perspectives. I think that the main identifying features of each of the characters is the role that they play in this story. For example, every time I hear Royo's name, I have to connect him to being the mercenary of the group. He's the fighter of the group. Every time I hear Mikhail, I have to connect him to being the King's Spy Master, and then Sora is the Poison Maiden, so on and so forth. So that's the only thing that I really struggle with when I'm listening to the audiobook of this. But if I'm trying to immersion read it, which I am right now because I do really like the audiobook of this one as it's full cast, I'm finding that it's not intricate enough to hold my attention when I'm giving it 100% of my attention and reading along and listening to the audio audiobook at the same time. And I think that that is because for me, this is mainly a very fun story. I find it very similar to a lot of like young adult heist stories that I've really enjoyed, with some slightly darker topics thrown into the mix, but it's not the most intricate story. I think the main reason why I enjoy this series is because I'd heard a lot of negative and very mid reviews. So when I went into it with very low expectations and an open mind, it actually really took me by surprise with how enjoyable it was. But I do think that given it's been a little while, maybe around a year since I read book 2, and you're kind of once again just thrown back into it with very little time to reacquaint yourself with what's going on, my interest in this series has waned a little bit, because it is kind of all one note. We have some dramatic plot twists in here, which is great. We have some like shocking revelations, betrayals, and I love all of that stuff, but the pace of this and the tone is very consistent and quite rapid throughout all 3 books in this series, and I find that that can get a little bit monotonous when it is the same kind of pattern over and over again, and I'm just not finding myself as absorbed with this one. Now, I will say one of the reasons why I could be struggling with this is because I love a little circuit. I've spoken before about how I tend to read in fits and starts, so I'll read a couple of chapters in the morning, I'll read a couple of chapters at lunch, maybe I'll squeeze in a couple mid-afternoon. Like, I don't do a lot of solid sit-down reading, which is why I've been trying to implement focus techniques recently to help me lock in a little bit more and utilize the time that I set aside for reading a little bit more efficiently. But something that I love to do to keep up the momentum in my book, but also get other things done at the same time, is I love to read a section of my book and then go do something else and then read a section. Now, recently I've been doing it on a chapter by chapter basis. So maybe I'll read a chapter and then I'll edit like a day of a weekly vlog, or I'll read a chapter and then I'll go do all of my admin, like respond to all of my emails. And with this book, it's quite difficult because that kind of system works perfectly if your chapters are like 10 to 15 pages long. The chapters in this book are more like 4 pages long. And so I think that my reading experience of this so far has been very sporadic, and I haven't really allowed myself the time to fully immerse myself in the story. So I am going to read, I think, about 5 chapters now before I go and do some editing and try and do more concentrated chunks of this one. I will be honest, I'm close to DNFing because I just have struggled so much over the last few days to pick this up. I've been reading this for about 3 or 4 days now. I can't remember whether I started it on Thursday or Friday, but it is now Monday, and I'm only 134 pages into this. And how many of these have I read today? I think 50 of those pages I've read today. So as you can see, I have been struggling, but I also had a lot to do over the weekend and I didn't feel very well. So I'm going to give the rest of this book a solid try. Hopefully we make it through, because I would be so sad to DNF so close to the end of a series. But right now, either I'm just not in the mood or my interest in the series has waned significantly since I read the first 2 books that I really enjoyed. And I checked the average rating on Goodreads as well, just in case it was a common thing that people didn't like the 3rd book as much as the other 2, but it seems to be a me problem. Just finished making my coffee, but I just wanted to let you guys know that I have fixed the problem with the book. So I mentioned to you guys that for books 1 and 2, I predominantly listened to them audio only. I think with both of them, I started immersion reading them just to get myself acquainted. And then when it got to the point where I kind of knew what was going on and who everyone was, I switched to exclusively audio. Now, the issue that I've been having with book 3 is that I've been attempting to immersion read the whole thing. And while I find this story enjoyable, and while I enjoy some of the dynamics between the characters, this series does not have enough going on for it to hold my attention if I'm reading it with my eyes. So I think it's a case of enjoying the audiobook a lot more than I enjoy the book itself, because I switched to audio at about 50% 50% of the way into it. I was so close to DNFing last night. Like literally I picked it up and put it down about 3 times before I decided to just pick up my cross stitch and listen to the audio. And I'm currently 78% of the way into it, and I'm enjoying it so much more now that I've given up trying to read along at the same time. It's holding my attention so much better. So yeah, I really enjoyed the audiobook of this. The story, apparently I don't enjoy as much as I thought it did. And through my experience of immersion reading the beginning of this, I think it's that nothing really changes with these characters from start to finish of this series. And like some bad stuff happens to them, so they are thinking about that a lot and kind of what that means for them, and obviously like it's affected them. But I don't really see any character development from book 1 to book 3. And I just read Human Rights by Juno Dawson, the last book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series. And one of my favorite things about that series is that the characters bear the scars of everything that's happened to them, and it kind of like layers on top and makes them feel really fleshed out and one-dimensional. These characters are not that. That is not what this series is doing. I just feel like the tone, the stakes, my investment in the characters is exactly the same now towards the end of book 3 as it was at the beginning of book 1. Like I'm not any more invested than I was. So I am definitely going to be finishing this one out now, which is great, because typically if this was like just a book, then I would have DNF'd it by now. But because it was the final book in a series, I was really reluctant to do that. So I'm happy that I have found a way to persevere to the end, and I am actually enjoying it now. But yeah, it doesn't bode well for the shelving and scrapping portion, which is sad, because I feel like unhauling a whole series, you know, that feels high stakes to me. So the good news is that I did push through, and so I managed to finish 3 Shattered Souls, thus concluding the 5 Broken Blades series. The bad news is that I rated this one 2.5 stars. I am going to be scrapping the whole series, which honestly hurts a little bit, and I also should have DNF'd this one. Honestly, I think I've made it pretty clear the only reason that I pushed through this is because it is the final book in the series, and you know, I didn't make it this far to only make it this far. So I felt like we needed to wrap this one up. I don't think that I necessarily gained anything by pushing through to the end of this, but I did like how it wrapped up. I really like the plot of this series. I think the plot is actually the strongest element. I think that the lack of character development is a little frustrating and makes this series feel very samey, especially because I find the monologuing to be very repetitive. Like each character talks about the same thing over and over and over again. And then the writing, the pace, etc., I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but I think that it remains a little bit too one note throughout the entire series. My main complaint of this series is lack of growth. I feel exactly the same way about it at the end of book 3 as I did at the end of book 1, and had I cared about the characters, had I become attached to them, had I felt like they had grown and changed because of the events of this series, the end of this would have been so impactful and I would have eaten it up, especially because I have a lot of complaints about fantasy, but especially fantasy that contains romance, always taking the easy way and always wrapping up in a happily ever after, which, you know, romantasy, we have to have that ending for the characters. But if we're talking about romantic fantasy or fantasy with romantic relationships in them, we don't need that level of surety, as Mike Holland proved in this series, because we do have some casualties. I honestly just wish I cared. There are also some pretty dynamic plot twists and betrayals throughout this series as well, which I feel like I would have also really appreciated had I been more invested. So that's why I say that the plot, I think, is pretty strong in this. Just the way that it's delivered ultimately didn't end up working for me, and I think part of that is because I have different expectations for different books in a series. Like from book 1 in a series, I'm not looking for perfection, I'm looking for potential and something to hook me and grab me in, like a reason to come back for book 2. In book 2, I'm looking for it to build upon the foundations that it laid in book 1, and what I really want to see is a level of escalation within the second book in the series, which I feel like the sequel to 5 Broken Blades had, especially within the plot. Like it ramped up the stakes a little bit. And then the third book in the series is where I'm truly expecting for something spectacular. I want the payoff to be worth it. Like I've read 1,200 pages in this series. I want something spectacular. I want to be shook. I want to be invested. I want to be on the edge of my seat. And unfortunately, I don't think that this delivered anything too different or more advanced than the first two books in the series, which is where it ultimately ended up not working for me. I do think that the first book in this series was my favorite because, like I said there, I'm not looking for perfection. I'm only looking for potential. And I feel like book one in this series definitely had that. If you are still interested in picking up this series, I would definitely say give it a try. I would recommend the audiobook route. It's a really good listen, especially because we have a full cast audio. There is one perspective though, it's Tai Young. He speaks faster than any of the other narrators, which is fine to a degree. I'm used to that with the audiobooks that Michael Kramer narrates with his wife, right? They do all of Sanderson and they also did Wheel of Time. He speaks much faster than she does. So not the end of the world, but I just feel like they didn't edit his perspective in this. I heard every swallow and breath that he took. And also there were some unnatural pauses where maybe the narrator had like took a pause where there wasn't supposed to be one and then it hadn't been cut. It felt a little bit weird, but I do recommend the audio of this series and definitely do not leave a lot of time in between the installments. You want to be reading these back to back. And I think that if you read this as one continuous story, it might be a little bit long-winded because that's like 1,200 pages, as I said. But I do think you will be a little bit more immersed in the story that way because it truly does not do a lot in terms of re-engaging you with the story or recapping anything. It like throws you straight into the next book in the series as though you've literally just put down the book before it. So now that we have come to the conclusion that I unfortunately will not be keeping this series, I am going to be putting this in my scrap pile, but I need to take the other two books off my shelves. Before we get there, we're going to swing by the stack and pick up a couple of books that hopefully will replace them on the shelves. The first two books in this series are pretty slim, but I am hoping that we can get two books on the shelves in exchange for the two that we're taking off. So one book that I would definitely like to get on the shelves is The Mist Thief by L.J. Andrews because I can't read this yet. This is book 3 in the series. It only ended up here because it wouldn't fit on the shelves and I wanted to prioritize some sequels. I already have book 2 in here, which I am hoping comes up at some point, but this one should really be shelved and can re-enter the stacks later when I have actually finished book 2. A little bit thick though, so we'll see how that goes. And then I guess we should also pick a book by an author whose name, like last name, begins with somewhere between A and C. So I guess Kelly Andrew. There is already a Kelly Andrew book up there, so this actually works pretty well. I'm not confident that this is going to get on the shelves, but we'll see. We need to take off 5 Broken Blades. I love these editions as well. And also 4 Ruined Realms, which of the 3 is my favorite edition, I think. Both of the books that I've picked out, I'm going to be trying to get onto that top shelf. So first up, let's move Stay for a Spell down, which does fit into that gap quite nicely. I'm feeling more optimistic now. First up, oh, you know what? I think we're going to be fine. Publication or alphabetical order. I think I normally do publication where possible. Oh, what a perfect fit. I am so surprised. So while removing a full special edition trilogy from my shelves may have just broken my heart a little bit, we do have a plus side, and that is that I now only need to read 2 more books for this episode because we have essentially removed 3 out of the 5 required books from the stacks. We have the book that I just read and the 2 that I just shelved. So we're on book 2 in terms of what I'm reading for this video, but book 4 in terms of the amount of books removed from the stacks. And let's see what that book is going to be. Number 10. I feel like we pull from this first stack more often than the second, but I might be making that up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to finish another trilogy. Let's hope that this goes better than that went, because last episode we were blessed, which makes me feel like this episode we're going to be cursed. So the book in question is Faithbreaker by Hannah Kaner. This is also coming at a time where I've just said that I'm excited for Hannah Kaner's 2026 release. I think it's called A Snake Among the Swans or something like that, which I think is released in, I'm sure it's either July or August. I'm sure it's a summer release. Just like how I've been talking about how excited I am for Verity Guild by Mike Holland, only to really dislike the final Broken Blades book and unhaul the entire series. So truly, let's hope this episode isn't cursed. This one is the final book in the Fallen Gods series. Yes, the Fallen Gods trilogy. The first book being Godkiller. Godkillers in this world are essentially mercenaries. They're people who are hired to kill gods. Now, this used to be a little bit of an undercover job when our main character Kirsten started doing it. However, in present day, the gods have been exiled. So there's this city, which used to be, I'm pretty sure, like the capital city of this kingdom or this world, where all of the gods reside, and that is now abandoned and nobody is allowed to go there. There are people who sneak out, who still support the god, who go out there on like pilgrimages, but otherwise it's forbidden to enter. So we do follow, I think we have 4 perspectives, although 3 dominant ones. Our most dominant one I would say is Kissin, who's the god killer, but then we also have a child called Nara who comes to Kissin with a little problem that she has, and her problem is that a god has bound itself to her. Typically in this world, gods are bound to shrines, so this is very unusual, and the little girl petitions Kissin to find out why this god is bound to her and to eventually separate them, because anything that affects one of them affects the other, and they can't be too far away from each other without being in extreme pain. So Kissin agrees to take this child to the Forbidden City to see if there's anything that she can do with her, and their path is intersected by Elagast, who is the most trusted knight of the king. And since this war with the gods, he's retired, he's set himself up in a little bakery, but one day his old friend the king comes to him and asks him to go on a mission to this Forbidden City to try and find a cure to something that is ailing the king that will eventually kill him, and their paths intersect and they end up working together to achieve all of their goals. I really loved book 1. I really like Hannah Keena's writing style, and I think that the atmosphere is on point. I feel like it's set in the world of an epic fantasy, but the focus of the story is more on what the characters are directly dealing with. So as somebody who loves like epic fantasy worlds and the complexity of them and the lore, I wish we were exploring a little bit more, and some of these things we were looking into were a little bit more relevant and intertwined with the plot. I hope that this one does not let me down. Fingers crossed. I need to look up a recap of the first 2 books, the second one especially, I think, before I dive into that, which I will do promptly so we can get started. The thing about Hannah Keena's books is that even though they're not very long, I think a combination of the richness of her writing and also the fact that the font in here, while it's not tiny, it's also not especially huge, really makes her books feel twice as long. And I feel like because she really leans into the atmosphere and makes sure that that's well developed, and also has a very finely detailed world, makes the story seem even longer in some regard, because we linger on those little details, which is 100% not a complaint, because the writing, the atmosphere, and the world building are my favorite things about this trilogy. But it does feel like I've read so much more than 132 pages. This is a book that you really want to immerse yourself in as well. When I picked this up, I do not want to put it down. Unfortunately, I have been pretty busy recently. I've taken a couple of trips. There's just like, you know, life stuff, work stuff, renovation stuff. And so I've been picking this up a little bit more sporadically than I would like. What I really want to do is just sink into this book for hours, which is an amazing thing, honestly, because a lot of the time, especially when I'm reading books where the writing isn't engaging me, I kind of want to keep putting it down. And I think because I enjoy the writing so much in this trilogy, it makes me want to keep reading and fully immerse myself in the world. I think I gave the first book in this trilogy 4 stars and then the second book 3. I know for sure that I did not enjoy book 2 as much as book 1, and so far I feel like I'm enjoying Faithbreaker a lot more. I felt like there was a real lull in the plot of the second book, and I missed a lot of the like dynamic between characters that I really enjoyed in book 1, and I felt like the direction that the world took, or the ways in which we were developing the world, wasn't as interesting because I didn't feel like it was building towards a point. While this series does have a strong plot line that centers around the turmoil that this world is currently in, where the worship of gods has been outlawed, but it is a world and a land that has been enriched for so long by the worship and the magic of the gods. I do think that the plot is the weakest element of this series, just because I feel like the focus is more on the world and the characters. And the thing that I like about the world in book 1 and also that I'm liking in book 3 is that we are still going on these little side tangents and going into the details of some of the gods that are not as especially relevant to the plot. Book 2 felt like a lot of side questing, kind of moving everyone around and then doing a little bit of exploration of the world along the way to put everybody in the position that they need to be for the rest of the plot to play out. Now book 3 is once again a little bit more plot focused, and I'm finding that I'm enjoying it a little bit more because we have this like clear structure. There is a purpose to what we're doing. We're building towards something while also still going off on these tangents and exploring little forgotten layers of the gods. And we also have this push and pull between people who want the gods outlawed still. They don't want to believe in their gods. They don't believe that they have a place in the world, and people whose lives are very closely tied to their beliefs and have been worshipping in secret or would like the opportunity to worship openly once again. And we're kind of following the two sides of this conflict with some of our key characters wrapped up in one side or the other. But then we also have kind of an entwining of these two things, even though we're following people who have very opposite beliefs. So definitely enjoyable, definitely intriguing. I am hoping to carve out some time this evening to get properly stuck into this. I just feel like when I'm wrapping everything up at the end of the day, I sit down on the couch and it's like, okay, it's time to read. And then I realize it's like 20 minutes away from bedtime and my reading time has gone. Probably not being helped by the fact that instead of reading in bed, as I typically do, even though I normally only get like 1 or 2 chapters, I've been watching ER. I'm not mad about it though. But what I would like to do is squeeze in a little bit more reading time somewhere. I have 125 pages left of Faithbreaker. And the more I get into this one, the more I remember why I feel like the plot is the weakest part of this series for me. And it's because the magic of the gods is not defined. Like some of that rolls kind of on vibes. And what that leads to is certain plot events seeming like they come out of nowhere or there's no precedent for them because the magic system is not a hard one. And you know me, you know how I love my rules, my regulations, my defined parameters to a magic system. And the fact that this is just a little bit more whimsical is something that I struggle with. And I think that that is the reason why this is not a solid 5-star series for me, because the writing, the atmosphere, the world building is all on point. I do feel like some of the character relationships as well ride the vibes a little bit. We have a lot of chaotic bisexuals in here, and I really appreciate that and like how that manifests throughout. I just find that I don't become too attached to any of the romantic developments of this series because we have multiple threads kind of going off in all directions and the characters can flip-flop between them at a moment's notice. So while I'm enjoying some of these romances developing, I'm not putting a lot of stock in them or a lot of investment in them because I know that they're not going to get, or not necessarily going to get, the level of attention that I would like them to. At the point where I'm at now with not very much of this book left, I do also feel like the plot is a little bit too scattered for my liking. At the point where I'm at now in this with not very much left, I think that everything's still a little bit more scattered than I would like it to be. And I'm really intrigued to see how Hannah Kena brings this together because this is her first series. So I have no expectations for how this is going to wrap up. I obviously have an assumption that we're going to reach a finite conclusion to the main problem that we're facing in here, but I don't know how much past that we're going to go. I don't know if the characters' individual storylines are going to be left a little bit more open-ended or whether it's going to be a conclusion that's very much like wrapped up neatly in a bow. So I'm definitely intrigued to see how Hannah Kena lands this one. But I do find, and I think I talked about this with Godkiller, I do find this series a little bit frustrating sometimes just because I find so many elements of it so promising and feed into those specific things that I like in fantasy. And then some elements really work against that, like the softer magic system and the fact that the plot can sometimes kind of meander a little bit. But I do like the gods in here and the way that Hannah Kena has chosen to explore this world. I like that the strength of the gods is dependent on the strength of the devotion of their subjects. It reminds me a lot of the Winter Night trilogy by Catherine Arden, where where the folkloric creatures are dying out because people are no longer leaving them offerings as they turn to Christianity. And our main character is somebody who can see these creatures, which is particularly rare, feels that she has to take it upon herself to try and keep them alive with the little devotion that she can give them as a singular person. And I like how that manifests differently across the gods. And it makes sense in that way why this is a magic system that lacks limitations. Each god has a specialty. One of the ones that we deal with quite frequently in here is the god of fire. So the powers that the god of fire has are pretty much what you would expect from a god of fire. She burns a lot. But not only does the power of the gods change with the level of devotion that is given to them, it also changes with the type of devotion that is given to them. You can forcefully sacrifice people, which encourages a god that thrives on fear, and you can also give them love and devotion, which causes the god to grow and manifest in a slightly different way, which I find really interesting. And I also really like the attitude of the gods. They very much think themselves above everybody, when actually they're kind of at the whim of mortals, because one of the things that we see right at the beginning of this series is that the world is a very different place since the king has outlawed the worship of the gods. And like I said with the Winter Night trilogy, they then start to shrivel and diminish when they're not receiving that devotion. I just finished Faithbreaker and I'm about to be so inarticulate because I find this series a little bit frustrating and also quite difficult to talk about because there are so many elements of this that I love, but there's almost equally as many things that don't quite work for me. So I always leave the books in this series not really knowing how I feel about them. In terms of the rating, I've given this one a low 4-star, a 3.5 to a 4, somewhere in that vicinity, which essentially means that I really enjoyed it, but it's not like a new favorite. And I think the confusion that I'm having in my feelings over this book is that if you asked me if I would reread this series, I don't think it would be a high priority, but I do think that there is potential there because of how much I enjoyed Hannah Keena's writing, but I did find the plot to be a little bit underwhelming. And that's not to say that I didn't like the end of this, because I actually really enjoyed the way that this ended, the way that it came together. I just feel like there is a lot of potential for drama and really dynamic, punchy plot points within this series that for some reason just don't quite land with me. Something that I really do like about this series is that there is a lot of melancholy throughout it. Kissing is not an especially happy person, and the reason why she's a god killer is because of trauma, because a god killed her entire family when she was a child, and it completely destroyed her faith in the gods. And then we have Inara, who when we meet her right at the beginning of book 1, her house has been burned down and she doesn't know where her mother is. Her mother is somebody who is very busy with her work. She doesn't really have time for her child, and she's always wanted to live up to her mother's expectations but has never been allowed to. So when she gets the opportunity to travel with Kitten, she has all of this sadness because she's been displaced, because she doesn't know where her mother is, because she's lost her home. But then we also have this really beautiful relationship blossoming between her and Kitten, where she finally gets to adventure and assist in a way that she always wanted to with her mother. And then you also have Elogast, who is so broken by the war that he fought in that he has not only retreated in terms of hanging up his sword and opening a bakery, he also has refused to go home to his family. He doesn't talk to any of the people that he used to work with. And the only real tether that he has to any semblance of life is this relationship that he has with his king, who he would do absolutely anything for. And I feel like somewhere along the way, the poignancy of all of these really intense emotional themes were lost along the way or not accentuated enough. And a lot of the themes of this book are hope, okay? We're not trying to leave all of these people as sad and broken as they were when we met them. We obviously have character growth in that regard, but I like that the characters have a lot of dimension and that they all come from this melancholic background in some way. And I feel like given some of the events of this book as well, I should really be more emotionally invested in this than I am. And while I love the scope of the world in here, I wonder if that is a result of prioritizing world building, even in places where, like I said, in book 2, it felt like it was more indulgent and exploratory than it was actually serving the plot line. When we could have prioritized character development or plot to create a higher level of attachment between the reader and the story. I would be really interested to know your thoughts if you've read this series, because I don't know if it is just a me problem. I can't even really pinpoint why I don't feel like the plot is explored to its full potential in this series. It definitely has a plot. It's not like it's a weak, wishy-washy kind of plot. Like, it undoubtedly forms the backbone of this novel. The series, I would say, is somewhat character focused, especially because we do dive so much into the background of all of these characters and also their messy relationships with each other. So I don't know what it is that stops this series from hitting with me, because I feel like if I take a step back and take my experience and my feelings out of it, I can't see anything wrong with this series, but I just feel like there's a little something missing or a little something that wasn't cohesive. That being said, my thoughts on this series are very positive overall. I think it's the writing that really draws me in. I've said this 100 times on my channel, but I could read well-written shit, and that is not to say that the books that I'm reading are shit. It's just that if the writing is good, there is a lot that I'm willing to overlook, and I would definitely consider rereading this series because I enjoy the prose so much, and I'm really excited to see where Hannah Kaner goes next. I'm really hoping in her next book she still has that really lush, beautiful writing style and a really like immersive, almost oppressive atmosphere at some points in this series. But whatever issue it was that I can't put my finger on with the plot and the characters, I do really hope is ironed out. Maybe it's like I said, the depth of the world in here would be a really great backdrop for an epic fantasy series, but the scope of the plot in here and the length of the books and the time that we spend with the characters is not on that same level. That's causing a little bit of dissonance for me. So I'm going to be shelving this one as I enjoyed it overall. And let's see, I guess, what I'm going to be picking up next. So we are quite nicely hanging out in the middle of these shelves for once, because Godkiller and Sunbringer are here. Now, the problem is that we have to go quite a way before we can find a book that I haven't read. I am kind of in two minds on whether I should unhaul A Fire in the Sky by Sophie Jordan. I decided not to pick up the Fairy Loot edition of the sequel to this because while I really enjoyed book one, I think I'm happy to pick up the sequel as a paperback or something, which means that I don't really need the first book, but I haven't like fully committed to that decision yet. Everything to the right of Godkiller is J. Kristoff, so that's not going anywhere anytime soon. We do have The Strength of the Few here, one of my most anticipated releases of last year that I have still not read, but the reason for that is that I would really like to reread The Will of the Many before I dive into that one, and that's like quite a big commitment, so we'll leave that there. There's also, I feel like, a very slim chance that I would unhaul that even if I did read it. This is a reread and resume series which I really need to get on with. The same for One Dark Window. Diary of Blood, I did really enjoy that one. Maybe I need to think about whether I want to keep that, but I did really like it. Fallen Stars, I want to reread Heavenly Bodies when book 3 is released. For the Stephanie Garbers, I would like to finish the Caraval series before I pick up Once Upon a Broken Heart. And then these two series I've also read, but right in the corner we do have an unread book that isn't attached to anything, which is quite a recent book that I've hauled actually. It's Stay for a Spell by Amy Coon. This one was the Goldsborough Fellowship book for the month of April, I believe. I am currently an ambassador for Goldsborough as well, so if you would like to buy anything that's currently in stock on their website, you can use my discount code, which is BeccaBooks10, to get 10% off. And this one is skewing a little cozy fantasy, so I'm not sure if I'm gonna love it. So I'm quite happy to go with this one, providing I can actually shelve Faithbreaker. But Royal Assassin is a little bit big, so I don't know if the gap I've made is big enough. Even if I don't unhaul Diary of Blood, I think I might want to put that upstairs when I put the other bookshelf back, because I like having series on here or books that are all by the same author because I think it looks really good. Let me just wiggle this out a second. perfect fit. Might even have some space over here. Oops. So my next book is going to be Stay for a Spell by Amy Coombe. This one is about a princess who wants to make a life for herself, and she doesn't really want to be a princess. So she ends up in a rundown bookshop where she is cursed to remain until she unlocks her heart's desire. But while she is locked in this bookshop, all of her royal duties are going unfulfilled, and so her parents send 7 princes. It doesn't say 7, but they're sending princes to woo her, hoping that will unlock her heart's desire. So it sounds like it'll be cute. I just don't love cozy fantasy. This is definitely skewing it in that direction, but sometimes something a little bit more lower stakes, a little comforting can work for me. So we'll see if this is the one. While I say I don't like cozy fantasy, it's not a genre that I've spent a good deal of time exploring, if I'm being honest. I was a little bit worried when I started this one because the writing is quite simplistic, but also very modern in comparison to the setting. This one has the makings of a really fun fairy tale-esque story, which I think is heavily implied from the synopsis, but it's set in this fictional small town that our main character, Tandy, has to visit on a matter of state. So her role in the royal family is to travel around the country and open bridges, shake hands with mayors, hold babies, and all of that kind of public facing stuff. And it's something that she doesn't really enjoy, but she doesn't actually enjoy any element of being a princess. She doesn't like balls, she doesn't like politics. All she wants to do is read her books, and at least what she's doing now allows her long carriage journeys where she can do just that. As somebody who loves books, she stops at this small town's bookstore when she realizes that she's run out of things to read, and the woman that works there gives her a key and tells her that she hopes that she finds her heart's desire, and this leaves a curse on Tandy, which means that she can't leave the bookshop. And you know, it's not ideal that she's been cursed and her parents aren't going to be happy, and her advisor, who's also her friend, is going to have to go and try and figure out how to free her. But actually, she's not that mad about being stuck in a bookstore. She enjoys the challenge of trying to run it. She's never had to do any cooking or housekeeping by herself, and she's looking forward to learning all of that. And there's a couple of people from the town who keep dropping in on her along the way that she starts to build relationships with in a way that she's never built relationships before, because every social interaction she's had is pretty forced. Her advisor has headed back to her parents to fill them in, but also to try and break the curse. But Tandy is very worried that her parents are going to go through the classic method of curse breaking, which is trying to find true love's kiss. And that is exactly what they try and do. And they send 7 princes to Tandy to try and break the curse that will free her from the bookstore, which will also result in a marriage alliance for these princes if they are successful. I gotta say, friends, I'm really enjoying this one. It actually reminds me quite a bit of the Secret Society of Regular Witches. Wait, that's not the title of that book. Oh, I was close. It's The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, which is a book that I actually didn't love. I was really excited about that one, but I felt like it focused more on the romance, which I didn't realize was going to be part of that book, than it did on this witch going to look after 3 young witches who didn't have any guidance. And then I felt like the romance was really out of place and distracted from what I thought the book was actually about, given what the synopsis says the book is about. This one lets you know in the synopsis that there is going to be a romantic element, but I also feel like the way that that is integrated, the flirtatious banter, the chemistry between the characters is a lot more natural and also a lot more apparent than it was in The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I also feel like, especially at this point where I'm up to 124 pages into it, the focus of this book is more on the day-to-day run-ins of this bookshop, and I'm not mad about it, considering that's kind of slice of lifey. It almost feels like reading a book about the tiny bookshop game that was released towards the end of last year, which I actually had a really good time playing as well, even though cozy games also, for the most part, aren't my favorite genre of games. And the little extra added element that we have in here is that we are set in a fantastical world. The fantasy is not overly explained, obviously, because that is not the purpose of this. One of the things that I'm really enjoying about how the fantasy adds to the story as well is that we have these little whimsical elements of the magic that assist in Tandy's exploration and running of the bookstore. I actually also think that something about this book is very soothing, following the idea of like, what would you do if you had a theoretically endless amount of time in a secondhand bookstore to make it your own? She can't do anything else. She doesn't enjoy her life outside of this. She doesn't know when the curse is going to be broken, and she's pretty sure it's quite a complicated curse. So she has just fully devoted her time and her energy to this bookstore and this very quiet but soothing life without the weight of responsibilities, because those responsibilities are not her choice anyway. And I feel like sinking into that perspective is feeling somewhat cathartic to me in some way. I'm finding this whole thing like really satisfying, and I also really like the humor and the banter in here, which, like I said, I was a little bit unsure about to start off with, because sometimes I find more modern language on a implied or assumed historical kind of backdrop a little bit jarring. But so far in this one, it's really working. I am, I guess, kind of nearly done with this book. I do still have 110 pages left, but honestly, it is a really quick read. This is reminding me of a blend of a live action Disney film, something like, I guess, Enchanted, and also the Hex by, is it Erin Sterling? I loved the Hex. I gave it 5 stars. It was a magical Halloween-y romance that really hit the spot for me at the time that I read it. However, I unfortunately didn't love the sequel as much, but this is reminding me of the Hex in that it does have, I guess, a pretty prominent romantic plot line. It doesn't overly focus on the romance. There's no sort of explicit romantic relationship going on, but I feel like it's very obvious from the beginning of this book. It also lays it out in the synopsis that there is going to be some level of romance in here. We also, of course, have that flirtatious banter that I'm really loving. And then we have a magical backdrop, a magical setting that isn't overly explained because it doesn't really need to be. It's not the kind of book where you need to know the nitty-gritty of the world building, but it's fun, it's immersive, it's magical and fantastical enough that it just adds a little sparkle to the story, because this sometimes goes into the minutiae of running a bookshop. We've talked about window displays, we've had promotional sales, we've been doing a lot of dusting, a lot of cleaning, a lot of rearranging, and like I said to you, that is weirdly cathartic to me in this. I'm having a really good time. It almost feels like I'm playing The Sims. I lost a large portion of my life, not mad about it, but a large portion of my life to The Sims 2, and specifically the open for business expansion. So I feel like this is really scratching that itch for me. And weirdly, I do feel like this is a case of this book hitting me at the right time, where I've read something a lot slower, a lot more dense. Also, in between some of the books for this video, I've been reading quite a bit of epic fantasy. So this is the kind of fantasy story that I need right now, something a little bit lighter, a little bit easier, a little bit more fun. And I do feel like it works really well. I can't tell you what this is doing differently in comparison to some of the cozy fantasy that I've read that I don't love so much. Sometimes the lack of high stakes can be a little bit boring for me because I want more, like I want a super impactful, like large scale plot. But I think it is the humor in here, the fact that the banter hits. I feel like when we're talking about stories like this where there is a romantic presence but I'm not feeling it, it's then really hard for me to enjoy the story as a whole if that key element is something that isn't working for me. I think something that's really fun about this as well is that it's not anything crazily unique. We're following a princess, she has been cursed, and we need something to break the curse, and she is trying to go down the unorthodox route of having her assistant find a sorcerer or some other way to break the curse other than true love's kiss, but her parents are insistent on sending these 7 princes to try and free her. I feel like Amy Coombe also does a really good job of making all of these interactions really entertaining, because that kind of thing can get monotonous, but I feel like the level of exasperation of our main character and the level of ridiculousness of every interaction with every different prince is kind of keeping this story alive for me. So who knows how I'm going to feel about it by the end. I think that if this turns smutty, it might kill the vibe for me, because the energy that I feel like this book is projecting, the vibe that I'm getting from it, is Disney live action movie. So I feel like if it goes down any kind of explicit route, it's going to feel really, really jarring. So that is the one thing that I don't want to see from the end of this. There is nothing in this book that would make me believe that it is going to have any kind of smutty content in it, aside from the fact that it's somewhat romantic. But I just wanted to put that out there, because I have read books like this before which feel very like crossover. There's a couple of lines in this that are a little bit extra flirtatious, but aside from that, like, this is a story that I feel younger people would enjoy, and I have read stories like that before that feel like they would be very suitable for a younger audience, especially with this, with the level of whimsy, the fairy tale-esque nature of it. And then I've had like a really explicit sex scene thrown in there for who knows what reason. So it's not that I'm necessarily expecting this book. I feel like it would be really weird if this book did have anything like that, but it's not like I've never seen it happen before. I finished the book and I adored it. I know. Nobody's more surprised than me about this, but the further I got to the end of this, the more that I realized it reminded me a lot of Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a children's series that does have a little bit of a romantic plotline in there as well, which this book obviously has, but then I think the combination of that with the whimsy, the adventure, the curse, the flamboyance and exaggerated drama of the story, I thought was very similar to the tone and the style of Howl's Moving Castle, which is actually one of my favorite books. Now, with that in mind, the thing that did bother me a little bit about this is that it does get a little bit smutty, and it doesn't go extremely far. It doesn't get overly explicit, but it does go further than I wanted it to, given the tone and the style of the rest of this story, which, as we know, I was a little bit worried about, and with good reason, apparently. I enjoy smut. I don't enjoy books that are smut forward, so they have a lot of explicit sexual content from the beginning right through to the very end. But I do enjoy fantasy, like romance, that has a slow building relationship that then also has some explicit scenes in there as well. But I do think that there is a time and a place, and I don't feel like this book needed the content to go that far. I feel like a wholesome storybook-esque, dramatic but heartwarming romance is all that this needed. And aside from a singular chapter of this book, that is exactly what this was. So I think to push it a little bit further really just plays into the trends of what people are interested in right now. And if you are somebody who loves smutty books, then honestly, no shade. I just think that because something is popular, we don't actually have to include it in every single book, especially when it is a book that does not call for that nature of content, you know? And this isn't exclusive to smut. We also have this with anything that's popular, like paranormal romance, dystopian. We've seen it all before. Now it's like more smutty content and also romantasy books. And it didn't completely ruin the story for me because, like I said, it didn't go too far. It just went a little bit further than I felt like it needed to go, given the nature of the story up to this point, and given that the overall tone of this book reminded me of things like Disney live action films like Enchanted, and also Howl's Moving Castle, which is a children's story that actually has a lot of value for adults as well. I do feel like having it be a little bit more explicit and pushing the romance just that little bit further just didn't feel right. Still 5 stars though. I would really love to reread this at some point. I feel like this is actually a perfect autumnal read, something transitional, you know, feel like as the weather is turning from a little bit warmer into the cooler autumn months. But I also wouldn't mind reading further installments set in this world. There is a character in here called Honey Rose, and the way that her storyline leaves off at the end, I feel like is something that could be explored, taking us to a different part of this world, but also once again with a little bit of a romantic plotline going in there as well. So this one definitely exceeded my expectations. I honestly picked this off the shelf because I thought it was going to be an easy scrap. Cozy fantasy is not something that I gravitate towards at all. Sometimes things that are a little bit more cozy do work for me, as I said when I picked this one up, and this is an outlier. I was thinking about making some short form content actually that is things that I don't like in books, but then books that are the exception to that rule. So for example, I don't like or have an interest in cozy fantasy. I don't go out of my way to read it. However, this is a 5-star read in the genre for me. So unfortunately for me, that means I'm gonna be shelving this one. So as this one is a standalone story, I am going to be shelving it upstairs. However, we still don't have that other bookshelf up and running. So I still have 2 big cardboard boxes of hardback books in my bedroom, and like last episode, we are going to be operating on a 1-in, 1-out policy because I can't tell how things will fit on a shelf when the bookshelf is out of action. So I actually think that there's a book in there that could help me out with this episode. So we did have some semblance of alphabetization going on in here, but I have been rummaging around in these boxes for various videos and now everything is out of place. I think this one is still in order a little bit more than the other one is, but I think that this is the box that I need to be in. It would also be really helpful if I could remember what the pages looked like, the sprayed edges on the book I'm looking for, but oh, I found it, it's right at the bottom. All I remembered about it is that it was purple. So the book that I'm going to pick is Dawn of the Firebird by Sarah Mughal Rana, which actually, now that I'm holding it in my hands, it's a little bit thicker than I anticipated, but the reason why I want to go with this one is because I have a standard edition of it down in the stacks. I received that in my introductory box when I became an ambassador for Bloomsbury Archer, which is Bloomsbury's fantasy imprint, and then it also came as the adult fairy loot book for the month of December. Essentially because the one downstairs is just a standard edition, I've kept hold of that one because I would much rather read the standard edition while I already have it than risk messing up these gorgeous edges. But if I love this book, I will probably just be shelving this one, and there's like a 99% chance that I would scrap the standard edition unless the book was so phenomenal that I wanted to annotate it, but I think that the chances of that are incredibly slim, honestly. So this one I'm really interested to try out. I was really excited about this one when I got it because it has one of my favorite fantasy plot lines, which is a character that breaks into an academy with the intention of breaking it apart from the inside. It's essentially the main purpose of the Red Rising series, which we all know is my favorite series of all time. There was also something else especially interesting about this, I think. The main character has magical powers. Oh, and it also features Jinn. I am a little bit worried about this one though, because while I was so excited when I hauled this, I received quite a few comments from people who were also excited about this book but sadly didn't like it, and I actually think that the general rating on this one is not especially high. I have no idea why though, and I also forgot that the naked hardcover looked like this, which is one of my favorite styles when it comes to naked hardcover of books. So I do hope that I really enjoy this one, and obviously this serves a double purpose because this should definitely remove a book from the stack. So if I do end up shelving this one, we only have to resolve what's happening in the shelves. I don't have to worry about going back to the stacks anymore before this episode wraps up. Just gonna slide on in here and grab this one, which will be the one that I'm actually reading. And then for bookmarks, I don't think I have any that have any kind of bird one. These are all of my Patreon ones from over the years. That's one of my favorites. But I do have some blue ones, I think. I have a Buffy one, Space, Sims. We have Firebird, so we could go Hot Girls Read. But actually, I think this one is perfect. I have just finished part 1 of this book, so let's talk about it. Part 1 is roughly 25% of this, and the book is sectioned into 3 parts in total. So I'll probably bring you a little check-in every time I tick off one of these sections. But the main character that we're following in here is very, very young to start off with. At the very beginning of the book, because before you get to part 1, there's kind of a prologue-y section, and she's very young right at the beginning of chapter 1, and she ages up a little bit in that chapter, and I think through that first section she's maybe around 12 or 13, and then we go from that age to age 16 in the first section. And I have struggled a little bit with her narration given that she is young, because she also reads so young, and I don't really know what the scope of this book is going to be. I think it's the first book in a trilogy, and I don't really know what the scope of book 1 is going to be in terms of her age throughout this first novel, but I am hoping that we get to grow with her a little bit more, and her narrative does evolve a little bit with that as well. But essentially she is the daughter of an emperor. Her mother, I think, is the emperor's 4th wife, but she has gone back to the clan that I imagine it's the one that she grew up in, and that is where our main character starts off and where she's grown up. She's actually nameless. She's waiting to go back to her father, the emperor, for him to name her, and she is growing up in this clan that is suffering from a lot of difficulties. They are under threat of constant attack. There has been a famine, so they're not eating very well. And one day her entire clan gets decimated. So she ends up finally returning to her father, where she finds the competition between the emperor's other children and his wives to be cutthroat. And so she has to learn really quickly how to defend herself, how to not back down, how to not be tricked by any of these people. And she learns at a very early age that you pretty much can't trust anyone around you. And she's also trying to impress her father, so she'll finally be named. This is a land that is facing a little bit of political turbulence. There are other emperors around who are wanting to take these lands for themselves. We have a lot of political intrigue in this first section, a lot of politicking, there are betrayals, and essentially the main character's entire family gets wiped out, which sends her on a path of revenge, which is pretty much what the synopsis tells us. I'm not at the point where we're at the military academy yet. I'm very much looking forward to that section, but I know that this book has been comped to things like The Poppy War and She Who Became the Sun, and I definitely see those comparisons. There is a level of brutality in here that is quite shocking, that reminds me of The Poppy War. Our main character is making some quite rash decisions that remind me a lot of Rin. I'm pretty sure she's called Rin in The Poppy War. It's been a long time. And I think that the storytelling style of this is quite reminiscent of She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. We also have, I'm pretty sure there's monks that train the main character as well in She Who Became the Sun, which is something that we also have in here. There's also the loss of family, the loss of home. I'm imagining we're going to have a war plot line in here. Essentially, the empire that's a big threat in this world is the one that has the military academy that our main character is going to infiltrate. She is somebody who is magically gifted as well, and this is a blessing that comes from the gods. This is a world that's heavily inspired by religion. It actually blends a bunch of different cultures and a bunch of different elements of religion, especially like the religions that I'm most familiar with are monotheistic religions, specifically like Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And we have elements of especially like Islam and Christianity in here, and all of these religions as well that believe in the same God do have similar origins. So this is set 500 years after Noah's Ark, but the background of this world is that Noah had his ark, there was a great flood, and 3 birds joined Noah on his ark, with 2, I think, getting on the ark and 1 flying ahead. And one of these is the firebird. We also have the raven and the crane, and each of these birds landed somewhere and created a new land and a new tribe. The one that our main character is from is the land of the crane, and the enemy land is the land of the raven, but also the firebird is going to be relevant in this at some point. And our main character has a power of light. There are 77 different types of magical manifestations. All of them do come from the heavens, and the one that our main character possesses is light. So these people with magical gifts are especially rare, but this enemy kingdom possesses the majority of them at the moment. And the country that our main character is from only has her and maybe a couple of others scattered around. So they're obviously on the back foot to start off with, which is, I'm pretty sure, how things go as catastrophically as they do for our main character and her family. Things that I'm liking about this so far, I like the world. Don't love the magic system at this point, but the world, the setup, the politics, I find very interesting. The magic, I don't feel like is very well explained, and considering we do have a glossary in here and there is terminology that is specific to this world and this entire system culture that this author has created, I feel like the words used to describe the magic are very simple and very repetitive. I can't remember if the word that they use for the thing that connects the main character to the heavens is called bonds or binds, but it'll just say the bonds are from the heavens and they bind you to the heavens. It's just kind of the same word repeated, but not actually giving me a good picture of what is actually going on with the magic. I'm finding that bit quite difficult to grasp. The writing in here is a little bit clunky, a little bit awkward. There are times when I find it quite immersive and interesting. It was a slow read for the first couple of chapters of this book to adjust to the writing style. After that, I found it a lot easier, but there are certain phrases or certain words strung together that just don't quite feel right in the sentence that is taking me out of it a little bit. And I also, at the moment, I'm finding it a little bit overly wordy. I also feel quite a lot of really poignant, potentially high emotion events have played out just in the first 110 pages that I've read so far, and yet I haven't had any reaction to them at all. I don't feel connected and established in this story. There is an abstract part of me that kind of feels bad, and if I'm feeling anything, it's more shock that we're already kind of going this far and we're setting up this character from quite a brutal, tragic background of loss already, but I'm not finding any kind of emotional connection with the story right now. And as I said, this book has been compared to books like The Poppy War and She Who Became the Sun, both of which I have read, and I definitely do see those comparisons right now. However, those are both books that I did not love. So I don't know how I'm going to feel about the rest of this book at this minute, but my experience with this book so far is kind of 50-50, given that I am already seeing how strong the comparisons are between The Poppy War, She Who Became the Sun, and this book. I would say that there's a high chance that this book is not necessarily for me, especially given that I don't feel emotionally connected to it. The writing, while it can be quite beautiful and elaborate and descriptive, especially the descriptions of food, I'm actually really enjoying. I do feel like it is maybe a little bit clunky and kind of keeping me at arm's length from the story because I'm not fully on board with the writing. Sometimes it seems a little bit too descriptive or a little bit too forced. Very early days, haven't hit the academy yet, which is the thing that I'm the most excited about. So we'll see how the second section goes, which I think is the biggest one of the book. It takes us over page 300, this big, and I'll report back. Unfortunately, I'm here with some not great news because I have decided to DNF Dawn of the Firebird at around about, I think it's not 50%, maybe around 40%. I'm on page 190. I made it up to chapter 17. Unfortunately, I feel like this has become less enjoyable in the section that I was the most excited about. There is a lot of information dumped on you in this book. The prologue section that I was talking about gives you a ton of information about the history of the world and the political climate, the warring clans and the different areas of the world. You also have a very different culture that's present in the clans than is necessarily the norm throughout the empire as a whole, or is very different from the place that we're in the first section of the book, where we're dealing more with the emperor and his court and the scheming of his wives and his children. We also have the monks, the deals that are going on between the different parties in this world. And then moving into the second section, we once again start again with the laws, the rules, the culture, the custom of this completely different area of the world that was founded on a different one of the heavenly birds, which is the raven. I feel like everything is just information being fed to me really heavy-handedly. So not only am I not retaining it because it's simply too much, but it's not being woven into the fabric of the book well enough that the context is helping to reinforce the information that is being passed along. And I think because of this overload of information, the character right now feels just like a vehicle through which the story is being viewed, as opposed to a character or anything resembling a person. And with a story like this, I feel like that is detrimental, because with all of the horrific incidents that have unfolded throughout the first 150-ish, 120-ish pages of this book, I feel like a connection to the character is integral to reinforce those events. I mean, they're horrific on their own, whether you identify with, care about, connect to the character at all, but the emotional impact of those events is really important to me, and I feel like the author is prioritizing info dumping over character connection, which I feel is heavily impacting the way that the events of the plot land. Like, I don't feel immersed in this at all. I just feel like I'm reading a ton of information that is not quite sitting and not quite meshing with me, especially when it comes to the magic system, which I feel is, I don't know whether it's overly complex or very simple and being described too heavily. I feel like we're doing maybe a little bit too much for this early in the book. And I have said before that, like, I do love an info dump at the beginning of a series, but what I actually enjoy is more of a training montage or like a tutorial to the series, where we follow a character who is inexperienced in whatever facet of the world we're learning about, which this character is, but we learn through them being taught, which once again is what is happening here. But the way that the character is being taught is simply through being told everything by older, more experienced characters around her, as opposed to interacting with the world and learning that way. And because this is the third instance of this happening, this is the third setting that we're exploring with this character, it's just at this point getting to be a little bit too much. And given that this book is similar to a lot of books that I've read before and have given like 3 stars to, I don't really see the value in me pushing through this one, given that my expectations of enjoying this are quite low at this point. So I would say, if you are a fan of books like The Poppy War and She Who Became the Sun, I've drawn a lot of parallels between the two, so I feel like this is something that you could enjoy. I don't know how well it holds up to those books, given that I haven't finished it, but also given that I didn't enjoy them a lot. They're not the most memorable books that I've ever read, and it's hard for me to compare how well a book does something against a book that I didn't enjoy, given that I didn't enjoy the book that I'm comparing it to, you know? But I do think that part of my issue with this book is that it is just unfortunately not for me. And then I also, on top of that, have issues with the delivery, which I can't remember. I know specifically why I didn't like The Poppy War. I found a lot of inconsistencies, and the main character is a very reactive character, and she makes a lot of decisions that, as somebody who's very like logic driven and reasonable, I just couldn't get behind, and she was really infuriating me. She Who Became the Sun, I just feel like I didn't really connect with that. I think that was my issue. But this also has elements of books that I didn't like The Hurricane Wars, which I felt the world building in that was really poorly executed, and I didn't care about the characters at all. So the entirety of that book was just a huge drag for me, which unfortunately I'm kind of seeing similarities in the world in here, and also my feelings regarding that. So given that I am DNFing that one, I am going to be scrapping the regular edition that came from the stacks, and then also the Fairy Loot edition, which I am a little bit upset about that, because this is a very nice edition. The cover, I really like the colour palette on the design. I like a lot, but not like a favourite one. This though, This I'm really sad to lose out on. Let me look at the end papers though. They are very nice art style wise. I do like to look at the end papers once I've read normally all of the book, but at least some of the book, so that with context I can appreciate them a little bit more. I do know that there is a hot villain in this book as well, but I'm pretty sure there's no romance. Sarah Mughal Rana has alluded to there being romance later in the series on her like social media, and that does intrigue me, to have an enemies to lovers story where they actually hate each other for a really long time before anything develops. But then I also like a hot villain that stays a villain, you know, like Sephiroth. Terrible person. Really nice to look at though. So to wrap up episode 26, I feel like we had a wide range of books in this episode in regards to like the way that I ended up feeling about them, because we have, right at the bottom of the scale, we have a DNF. And then moving slightly up from there, something that I'm really sad about is that we had a 2-star read. We then had a book that I enjoyed quite a bit but didn't love. And then we also had a surprise 5-star. So overall we attempted 4 books for episode 26, 3 completed, 1 DNF'd. We also completed 2 trilogies, great news, love that for me, and found potentially a new favourite book of the year. So pretty successful overall. We also managed to clear quite a bit of shelf space in this episode with, 5 books scrapped, an entire trilogy, and also 2 copies of the same book. So pretty productive in that regard. And we also had 4 shelves in this one, 2 that went straight from the stacks onto the shelves, and then 2 of course that I read and enjoyed enough to keep. So that means that I have achieved my goal for episode 26 of removing 5 books from the stacks. We started this episode on 29 and we are going to be wrapping it up on 24 books, which should mean that for the next episode I should only have to read 4 books again, but I think I may have to add a couple of books in here, given the fact that July has been quite a heavy month in terms of books I've hauled in comparison to the rest of the year. It shouldn't be too much though, fingers crossed, but we'll see how everything's landed when we get to the beginning of episode 27, which once again I think is going to be a random number generator episode or something along those lines. Been really enjoying, like I said, the spontaneity of this, and I feel like it has resulted in some quite surprising picks and also results from the books that I've been reading. But I do hope that you have enjoyed episode 26. Do of course be sure to let me know if you have. The next vlog that you guys see on my channel will either be a shorter vlog, like a 24-hour reading vlog or something like that, or maybe an epic fantasy vlog that I've been working on. So keep your eyes peeled for that if you are at all interested. But aside from that, I do hope you've enjoyed this one if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.